So I'm going to talk a little about Tim Wise's presentation and then Cohn's article. And I really struggled with Tim Wise's presentation. And I tried writing this all down, and I couldn't find a way that it didn't come across as very racist. I thought maybe with an audio, with me speaking, it might be a little more understandable where I'm coming from. I really liked some of what Tim was saying, especially in recognizing white privilege and how that impacts not only other cultures but even white culture, and how negative that is, and how kind of felt like a lot of what Tim was saying was a lot of stuff that's going on that we're not aware of because we're living in it, and a lot of that is because we benefit from it. And I think that that's very true. And in the first half of his speech, he talked a lot about how that impacted black culture in America, and in ways that people are still held back. And I know that still happens. I don't think I realize it because I'm white. I don't get it, and I think that's a lot of what he was saying. But Tim does something that a lot of people do, and they seem to look only in one direction. Like for so long, black culture and black people have been taken advantage of and have been treated as second-class citizens, and so we're doing this thing where we pivot away from looking at their culture at all with any kind of blame or if any kind of recognition of what ways they could change to make it better, and we just solely focus on this other side and say this is the problem. It's like the pendulum has swung so far this direction. So Tim's presentation, it was hard to listen to because I felt like he was minimizing responsibility that black culture might have for itself. And he did this as well with the terrorist thing and the Muslims, which I'll get to in a second. But it made me wonder that if Martin Luther King Jr. was here today, whether he would be spending his time marching on Washington, saying things have got to change, things have got to get better, we have to have more equality, or whether he'd be standing up in front of his own congregations and saying, what are we doing? In what ways are we contributing to this? We have the highest we have the highest teenage pregnancy rate. We have the highest rate of single motherhood. We can't keep blaming on other people. We got to take responsibility for that in ourselves. Where are the fathers in our community? Why do we have the highest rate of incarcerations? And the reason why I bring that up, these statistics, is because in the last 60 years we have more equality than we had before. It's not perfect. There's still a lot of broken areas, which Tim was very good about pointing out. But to see in some of the ways that the black culture seems to have gone backwards. And this is hard for me as a white person to say this because I don't know if I'm just perceiving this whole thing backwards or whatever. But to see in some ways that it's actually gotten worse while equality has risen, I wonder if someone who is willing to look at both sides of the coin wouldn't recognize white privilege and how that impacts black people from day to day, but also that a black person wouldn't recognize, hey, we have some responsibility in here in changing these narratives that are going on in our culture, and working through some of this stuff. And we have a responsibility here too. And that's just the part that I didn't hear Tim ever get into. And so it's hard for me to listen to that and go, just there's more there. And he was doing this with the terrorism thing. Like he was citing people who were mentally broken or who were maybe even pathological. And then he was comparing them to 9/11 and saying that these on 9/11 it was just Arabs with a pissy attitude, and that's not at all what happened on 9/11. It was people with an ideological buy-in to Islam that they felt that they needed to kill large amounts of other people in order to shed light on um, how destructive America was, or some kind of redemptive. I don't understand all of that, but just to say it's Arabs with a pissy attitude, you're minimizing blame on one side and maximizing blame on another side. It's hard to listen to or agree or buy into that. And this is not just Tim. A lot of people do this day. They maximize blame on one side and minimize them on the other side. I would love to hear someone just give an honest presentation and account of racism in America. I don't think Tim did a very good job of that. I think Tim had a very biased view and a negative view, and I think he brought out some accuracies, but without bringing out both sides of it, it left a lot wanted in that one. So I struggle with Tim, even though he had a lot of good stuff to say and actually maybe start recognizing and questioning things. There's a whole hunger and a thirst in me to have the other side of the coin spoken of as well, and to say, hey, or like going back to the Muslim thing, to say, hey, there is a problem with radical Muslims, and while it's not the majority of them, this is something that needs to be addressed. Perhaps the Muslim community should address this first. Perhaps they should be the one to stand up at the loudest and to say this is not okay, or even to go in and deal with those who are attacking and killing people around the world. And I know that's also changed a lot since Tim gave that presentation. There's been a lot more terrorism from a Muslim background since then. And then on Cone's article, I found it interesting, and maybe I missed this too, but he kind of spoke about you can't take the gospel seriously if you're not willing to stand up in these social areas of injustice and fix those things. And I agree with that. And especially he was talking about joining with black culture and be willing to he gave the analogy from his own local issue at Union Seminary and saying, hey, we shouldn't be traveling around the world and trying to unify our theological beliefs and help one another if we can't even go across the street in Harlem and help those. But it really made me think about the church in the New Testament and this liberation theology idea and this kind of like taking care of everyone. It's true and it's the heart of God. But when you see the New Testament, especially in the book of Acts, you don't see a group of people who are political in a way that they're trying to make sure that they're taken care of. And maybe I'm missing something there, but the early Christians, these martyrs, the blood of the martyrs the church was built upon, they were not concerned with anything beyond living into the power of the Holy Spirit and the direction that they were guided by. It wasn't anything to do with race. It's something that Paul made very clear in a probably more heavily racially charged era than we're in today. Race wasn't the central factor. It was something that happened, but there was a greater story of the gospel that was there. And so part of me with Stone's article, it almost seemed like he wanted to make the primacy back on that racial reconciliation, and that if you're a Christian, you have to be focused and driven towards racial reconciliation. And I don't know, that's just, I almost wonder that we're not sacrificing a bigger picture of the gospel and putting our emphasis on that. Maybe the racial reconciliation happens naturally as we live into who God's called us to be, and that might seem like I'm trying to excuse it or something. It just seemed like early Christians weren't concerned with saving their own lives because they knew what they were doing and the aim of the gospel. That, I don't know. We put so much focus on making things right for people here on earth, making everything equal and good for people here on earth. We might miss out on the bigger picture of who God's called us to be. Like there's this spiritual level of things that are happening, and then there's this temporal level of things that are happening on earth. And God, I think, is calling us in whatever ways we can to love people and to make their lives better here on earth, including sacrificing ourselves that we should. But if that comes at the cost or that we miss out on the spiritual level, then this should not trump that. I don't know. I know this seems kind of critical, but that was just me trying to be an honest response to those two sources.